Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Movie Goodness here on the KB Radio Network. And this is the show where we examine life through cinema. How are we doing, everybody? This is a special episode. Every episode is special. Every single one of Movie Goodness episodes is special. But this one is special to me, whereas all the other ones were special for all of you. But this is for me. This show today is for me, and I just want y'all to come along for the ride. Enjoy this ride because as of today, the day of this episode's release, June the 30th of 2023, a day that will live in infamy because this is the day where we get the final theatrical release of a film franchise that has blessed our souls for over 40 years. And it is the iconic character of Indiana Jones. And today, on June the 30th, we get the fifth and final film from this franchise of this character, Indiana Jones in the Dial of Destiny. And the character of Indiana Jones, who was brilliantly portrayed in all five films. Well, all four thus far, because I haven't seen the fifth as of yet. But I will see it this upcoming weekend by Harrison Ford, the great Harrison Ford. And, in any other film franchise, when you have an 80 something year old man starring in action adventure film, you would kind of sit back and say, "Nah, I'll pass." But Indiana Jones is timeless. I don't care if he was 180. I want to see this movie because Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones, and he has grown older, but the movies have reflected that, thus far. And according to a lot of early reviews of Dial of Destiny, they really lean into the fact that he's old because they don't have a choice. He's old, but it is what it is at this point. This is the final go around, and I just want him to go out on top. I mean the character of Indiana Jones. And this is one of my favorite cinematic characters of all time. I love superhero movies and I love superheroes and all that there. That goes without saying. Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, all those characters. But you can find them in other medias. Even if you don't watch a Batman movie or an Avengers movie or a Justice League movie or whatever, you can still pick up a comic book. You can go watch the animated series or whatever it may be. But when it comes to characters just for the films, or predominantly in film, I can't help but put Indiana Jones at number one because this is a character that I had my whole life from the start. I was 2 or 3 years old when the first the Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and I didn't watch it then, but I think I because like I said, I was 2 or 3 years old. Of course, I didn't go to a theater. At least I don't know. Maybe I was in the theater with my dad or whoever to go see it. It's possible. I doubt it, but it is what it is. I saw it a little later on. Didn't get the opportunity to witness it in theaters, but I saw it at home, and I was just, you know, I fell in love. I fell in love with film. I fell in love with this character. I fell in love with this story. I fell in love with it. Adventure films, action films. I fell in love with Harrison Ford um, because I saw Indiana Jones before I saw Star Wars. And, when I finally got to see Star Wars, when I was like, wait, that's Indiana Jones in the cockpit. you know, but he's Han Solo, and both of those characters. Another character that's high on my list of favorite characters in cinema. Uh, coincidentally played by the same individual, Harrison Ford. But Indiana Jones was just the first character in film that me personally I fell in love with. We all have them. You know, we all had that one character from a movie or even a TV show that just we love. We love, whether it's Indiana Jones or Han Solo or John McClane. You know what I'm saying? Or you go to TV, maybe it's Madlock, maybe it's Perry Mason, or characters like that. It's some iconic character that made you fall in love with movies or made you fall in love with a certain franchise. And this was the one for me. I always wanted to be Indiana Jones, even though I was a short black kid from New Orleans that didn't know anything about archaeology. I wanted to go on these adventures, find these artifacts. I was so intrigued with history because of these films. And, I learned a lot about Nazis because of these films. Weirdly enough, they didn't teach all that in schools. Granted, these are fictional stories, but they're hovering around the truth. But I digress. Today's show is, of course, the Indiana Jones edition of movie goodness, in commemoration, in honor of the final film in this franchise that's being released today. And I figured, you know what? This would be the perfect time to go through the entire franchise and give reviews of every one of the Indiana Jones films. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade, and even Indiana Jones in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I mean, it's a part of the franchise, so I have to review it. All four of those films directed by the great, the maestro, my humble opinion, the greatest director of all time, Steven Spielberg, and is the brainchild of the creator of Star Wars, George Lucas. So you have a situation where you have Steven Spielberg, George Lucas coming together to create this character. I mean, where could it go wrong? It did at the end, but it that's besides the point. But the first three are certified classics. So we're gonna go through how this all came to be and how much of an impact this character has had on pop culture. So let's start off with a little history. Indiana Jones is an American media franchise based on the adventures of Dr. Henry Walton Indiana Jones Jr., a fictional professor of archaeology that began in the year 1981 with the film Raiders of the Lost Ark. In 1984, a prequel, which I didn't know at that time, but it was a prequel, The Temple of Doom, was released. And in 1989, a sequel, The Last Crusade. And unfortunately, there was a fourth film in 2008 entitled The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But we are getting the fifth and final film today in theaters, The Dial of Destiny. This film franchise was created by George Lucas and stars Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. The first four films were directed by Steven Spielberg, who worked closely with George Lucas during their production. In 1992, the franchise expanded to a television series, which was entitled The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, portraying the character of his childhood and youth, and including adventures with his parents. Marvel Comics began publishing the further adventures of Indiana Jones in 1983. Yes, so technically, Indiana Jones is a part of the MCU. Not really, but Marvel did a lot of comics uh, based off of popular films or hit movies, in the 80s and 90s. So that didn't make them actual part of the canon, but I always chuckle when I read stuff like that and see stuff like that because I never read the Indiana Jones comic book. I knew they existed. There are also Star Wars comic books from Marvel. Uh, there's a RoboCop a comic book from Marvel. So I mean, I guess you could say RoboCop is part of the MCU too, which would be awkward with him and Tony Stark. I don't know how that would work, two Iron Men, but I digress. In 1991, Dark Horse Comics gained the comic book rights for the character. Novels of the films have been published, as well as many novels with original adventures, including a series of German novels by Wolfgang Hallerben, 12 novels set before the films published by Batum Books, and a series set during the character's childhood inspired the television show. Numerous Indiana Jones video games have been released since 1982. I had one, or at least I played one, and uh, it wasn't good. I'll just say that. Now, this is where it all came to be. In 1973, George Lucas wrote The Adventures of Indiana Smith. Like Star Wars, it was an opportunity to create a modern version of movie serials of the 1930s and 1940s. George Lucas discussed the concept with Philip Kaufman, who worked with him for several weeks and decided upon the Ark of the Covenant as the MacGuffin. In case you don't know what a MacGuffin is an object or a device or an event or something that is necessary for the plot and it drives the motivation of the characters. That's movie speak. But yeah, the Ark of the Covenant. And that was appealing for me because, hey, I went to Sunday school. I knew what the Ark of the Covenant was. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting when I saw the movie. But the project was stalled when Clint Eastwood hired Kaufman to write The Outlaw Josie Wells. And in May of 1977, George Lucas was in Maui trying to escape the worldwide success of Star Wars. And his friend and collaborator, Steven Spielberg, was also there, who took a vacation after he had just finished Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And Steven, I guess, sipping Mai Tais on the beach or whatever. And Steven Spielberg told George Lucas he was interested in making a James Bond film. That was one of his dreams, to make a James Bond film. And George Lucas told him he had an idea that was better than James Bond. He outlined the plot to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Steven Spielberg loved it, calling it a James Bond film without the hardware, without all the gadgets and Aston Martins and tuxedos and, all that good stuff. But it was like a grounded James Bond, if you will. And had the character's sub name changed to Jones. And so it was initially Indiana Smith. Steven Spielberg came with Jones, and so Steven Spielberg and George Lucas made a deal with Paramount Pictures for 5 Indiana Jones films. So with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas getting approval to go forward with the Indiana Jones film series, I figured this is a good time or a good segue to go right into our first review. And it is none other than a 1981 classic, the one that started it all, Raiders of the Lost Ark, a 1981 action adventure film directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Lawrence Kasdan, It is based on a story by George Lucas and Phil Kaufman. This film is set in 1936. The film stars Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, a globe-trotting archaeologist who is in a race with Nazi Germany to find the long lost Ark of the Covenant, which is said to make an army invincible. Teaming up with his tough farmer love interest, Marion Ravenwood, who is portrayed by Katherine Allen, Jones races to stop rival archaeologist Renee Bullock, who is played by Paul Freeman, from guiding the Nazis to the Ark and its power. As I said before, this film is one of these films that changed my life when I watched it, with just the amazing storytelling and action and acting and direction, and it began my love affair with Steven Spielberg. This is where I fell in love with old Steve. Uh, and we have been in a not a love hate relationship. I love way more films of his than I hate. I don't hate any of his films, but there are a couple of them that I don't need to see no more. AI, don't need to see that again. It was just boring. Um, the BF, what is it? BFG. I don't even think I finished watching that movie. It's been a few movies, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which we're going to talk about later on. But aside from that, all the rest of them are just money for me. Love Steven Spielberg, and I love his direction here. And you can tell throughout this film his love affair with James Bond. This really did feel like a James Bond film. If you go back and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, actually all of them, aside from Crystal Skull, they feel like James Bond movies. Indiana Jones has that swag, for lack of a better term. He just has it, it's the way it was shot. It was a scene when he goes and meets up with Marion Ravenwood, who was portrayed by Karen Allen, and when he was walking out of that little bar, and Harrison Ford, the camera is facing his back, and he just turns slightly. It's like it's dark, but the way it's lit, when he turned, gave that little side look, and just the light hits his eyes. It just felt James Bond to me, and it was just a beautiful shot. It's one. I love that shot. It just so subtle, just little things like that, that set this movie off and set Steven Spielberg's direction off. And I don't know, it just hooked me. But what really did hook me was the opening scene. The opening scene when we're going into this cave or whatever, or this temple, should I say, and it was just laden with booby traps. And you never see Harrison Ford's face, but you see his little assistant, who is played by Alfred Molina, by the way, who went on to become Dr. Octavius in the Spider-Man films and countless other movies. But that's a young Alfred Molina. And Indiana Jones cleverly gets through these booby traps and gets to this little idol. And he has the bag of sand because it's what's the word I'm looking for? Compression, a compression laden trap, should I say? And if you move the idol, the thing will go down because of the weight differential. And so he has this bag of sand, and he has to guess how much weight, off of this bag. And before he puts it all there, he takes some out, just a little handful. He's like, yeah, that's enough. It just that little thing, and you're like, man, this dude know what he's doing, And he makes the switch real quick. It is a little, simple little switch. Now this scene was copied in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. When the opening scene with Peter Quill was still in that orb that contained the Infinity Stone. Granted, it was done with bigger special effects. Probably that scene cost more than Raiders of the Lost Ark all together. But anywho, it was copied and pasted, but it was a nod to it, and I loved it. Anyways, he makes the switch, but apparently his measurements was off. It triggered the traps, and now he's running for his life. And Alfred Molina's character betrayed, throw me the idol. One of the hallway, the floor had collapsed, and Alfred Molina had swung over with the whip that Indiana Jones had, and Indiana Jones had the idol in his hand, so he couldn't swing with well, actually the whip had failed, and it was still in Alfred Molina's hand, and Harrison Ford's like, throw me the whip, and Alfred Molina's character was like, oh, throw me the idol. You're not gonna be able to swing with the idol. And so he threw him the idol, and Alfred Molina just dropped the whip. He was like, see you later. He betrayed him. So so Indiana Jones jumps and barely makes it. And this is a foreshadowing of this character. He jumps the hole, but he doesn't quite make it clean. He barely makes it over. And that's what I love about this character. He wasn't invincible. Like James Bond always found his way out of situations, just like Indiana Jones, don't get me wrong. But, you know, James Bond did it in a debonair way, in a very gentlemanly way. He still can straighten up his tie while he's doing it. You know, Indiana Jones was the everyman hero. You know, you can see yourself as Indiana Jones because he wasn't perfect, and he didn't perfectly land that that jump, and he almost killed himself. And so he gets over it. He pulls himself up. He's going after Alfred Molina, and he notices that Alfred Molina had triggered one of the booby traps and was killed with spikes. Spikes went all the way through him. I'm like, oh man, we in for a treat here. Uh, so he picks up the idol, and all of a sudden you hear a noise, and it's the boulder. And this is one of the most iconic moments in film history. Even if you haven't seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, you've seen this clip of Harrison Ford running from this giant boulder. And I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when I was discussing Batman and how moments in cinema changed my life. It was the silhouette of the Batwing against the moon in Batman 1989. It was the T-Rex coming out of the cage or the fence in that iconic scene when he attacked the Jeeps in Jurassic Park. And in this film, Indiana Jones escaping the boulder out of that temple. Those were the three moments that just changed my life. And 2 out of the 3 were directed by Steven Spielberg. So with that opening scene of this movie, it lets you know that we're in for the ride of our lives. We're in for a real ride of our lives with this film, with this character. And after all of that, he gets out of the temple, and there's Bullock, who has the natives surrounding him, about to kill Indiana Jones, and he takes the idol. Indiana Jones went through all that work and still didn't get the idol. You know, it was soul crushing, man. It was like, my God, you went through all that and you still didn't get it. But he was a fighter, and that's what you love about this character. He's a fighter, and when he returns back home, he gets recruited by the government, to go find the Ark of the Covenant, because the U.S. government had found out that the Nazis are trying to find the Ark, and the myth or the lore is that whoever finds the Ark and have the Ark of the Covenant with them, as far as the army is concerned, It makes the army invincible. Now, in case you don't know what the Ark of the Covenant is, I'm gonna bring y'all to Sunday school right quick. The Ark of the Covenant contains the Ten Commandments, the original Ten Commandments, the tablets that God wrote on Mount Sinai and gave to Moses. So the legend tells whatever army has the Ark and is marching with the Ark of the Covenant, that army is invincible. And so the Nazis like, okay, we're gonna we're gonna try this out. And this all stems from uh historical facts that the Nazis were trying all type of uh methods to rule the world, I guess you could say, win this war. They tried things with the occult. They tried things with science. They tried everything. They threw everything against the wall to see what stuck. Luckily for all of us, nothing stuck. But this was one of their plots. I don't know necessarily if this is, facts based on a true story type stuff, but it wouldn't shock me if it is. But he goes on his adventure to he links up with Marion Ravenwood, links up with Sala, um, trying to find the Ark, digging in the deserts for it, trying to beat out the Nazis, and we have some awesome stunt work throughout this film. This is pre visual effects spectacles. Even though this film contains some visual effects, of course, at the end of the movie when they actually opened up the Ark, but a lot of in-camera work, a lot of stunt work, uh, the fight in the convoy where Indiana Jones is fighting the one of the Nazis while they drive. He threw him out the front window, and he's hanging on to the hood, and he's losing his grip, and he end up going under the vehicle while he's driving, and latching his whip to the undercarriage and able to pull itself up on the back bumper, come back up, get into the cab, throw the guy out of the window, and actually run him over. All that was practical, and it was just beautifully shot, very exciting, adrenaline filled, and it was a lot of scenes like that, and one of the most memorable ones was the snakes, the snakes in the temple where Bullock locked Marion and Indy in there, and Indiana Jones is not a fan of snakes. He's not a fan of them, and I always loved that because my mom cannot stand snakes. Granted, neither can I, but my mom can't stand to see them on TV. She can't stand the word. If you say snake around it, probably if she listening to this right now, she probably turned it off by now because I said snake 5 times. And so she's the mere whisper of snake drives her insane. And it's the same thing with Indy. And they're locked in it with all these different snakes. And they were really, the actors were really in with real snakes. I would have quit. I don't care if it was Steven Spielberg. Yeah, I'm done. I'm good. Yeah, I'll pass on this one. But all of the action, everything worked. Loved the end when they opened the Covenant and the special effects. And this was like one of the earliest films to use CGI like this. And it looks seamless. It's not even dated. If you watch it today, it looks great. It was beautifully done, and it was scary. The guy face melting off when he was looking in it, because it's forbidden. You cannot open up that ark, and whoever looked upon it would die, and they all die. Everybody who looked upon it, but Indy knew. Indy knew to close his eyes, and he told Marion to close her eyes. And so, great job by Steven Spielberg, Harrison Ford, George Lucas, every other actor who was in this film. Awesome job. Also, I'm gonna say this now because we're gonna come back to it in a few films from now when they boxed up the Ark of the Covenant and Indiana Jones asked like, "What y'all gonna do with it?" You're like, "Oh, the government was like, oh, we're gonna research it. We got top men on it." And Indiana Jones, who knows everybody, so he's like, "What top men?" And then the government was like, "Top men." And then it cuts, and we see the scene, the final shot of the film, where it's being boxed into a crate into this huge warehouse with a million and one different crates and just stored off. And that was the end of the movie. They weren't going to look over it. They just wanted to keep it. They just wanted to have it. And that was the end of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, it wasn't initially named Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was just called Raiders of the Lost Ark. But once this franchise picked up steam and everybody identified with Indiana Jones, and every other film after this was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and so on. They slapped Indiana Jones ahead of this title as well. It's all good to me. They could have called it Monkey Poo. I still loved it. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark gets a letter grade of an A plus. Perfect film. One of the greatest films in this era. I don't know. I mean, point me to a film that is more perfect, and I know that's not proper English. More perfect than this. Uh, it has everything. It's funny, action, romance, adventure, history. I mean, it has it all. Has it all. You never get bored. Very exciting film. I can watch this a million and one times, which I probably have. I probably have watched this a million and one times. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark was made for $20 million. It went on to gross $389.9 million worldwide, which in 1981 is the equivalent of Avatar type money. It was a giant hit for Paramount, and they were all in for a sequel. Uh, the film went on to be nominated for 9 Academy Awards. In 1981, it was nominated for Best Visual Effects, which it won, Best Sound Mixing, which they won, Best Sound Editing, which they won, Best Production Design, also won, Best Original Score by John Williams, didn't win that, which is a travesty. Best Film Editing, which they won. It was also nominated for Best Cinematography, Best Director for Steven Spielberg, and Best Picture. Unfortunately, they lost all three of those categories. It went on to win 5 Academy Awards. Raiders of the Lost Ark is now considered one of the greatest films ever made and has had a lasting impact on pop culture, spawning a host of imitations around several medias and inspiring other filmmakers as well. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, A plus. Now, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas got a success, got a monster hit on their hands, and they decided to make another Indiana Jones film. And this time around, it was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And they aimed to make Temple of Doom much more darker. And the reason why Temple of Doom is darker than any other Indiana Jones film is because of their personal moods. The personal moods of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. They had both around this time had breakups and divorces. They were going through in their personal life, and so this film reflected their personal, I guess you could say, hurdles that they were clearing in life, which explains a lot because in Temple of Doom, we got a villain that rips out people's hearts. So I guess their heart got ripped out by their former significant others. I don't know. It seemed, I guess it was a metaphor. Who knows? But George Lucas made the film a prequel because he didn't want Indiana Jones to fight Nazis again. He didn't want Nazis to be the villain this go around. So he had the idea of the Monkey King in a haunted castle. So that's what Temple of Doom would have been if George Lucas had his say. But eventually created the Sankara stones, and that would be this film's MacGuffin. Um, George Lucas had hired two writers, Willard Huck and Gloria Katz, to write the script, as he knew that they had a deep interest in Indian culture. The major scenes that were dropped from the previous film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, were included in this film. Originally in Raiders of the Lost Ark, they were supposed to escape the this giant rolling gong and use it as a shield. That's in the opening scene of Temple of Doom. That didn't happen in Raiders of the Lost Ark. They used it here. Falling out of a plane and using a raft to as a parachute. That was originally written for Raiders of the Lost Ark. They used it here. The escape from the mine on the cart, that exciting adrenaline filled escape, that still pumps me up to this day. That was also written for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Didn't use it. They used it here. So since we've been diving into it and dancing around Temple of Doom, let's go on back to the year 1984 and review the action adventure film directed by Steven Spielberg, the second installment in the Indiana Jones films franchise, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This film serves as a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and once again, reprising his role as Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford returns. Capshaw, Phil Stone, and Oscar winner Kiwi Kwan. This is his film debut as Short Round. In this second installment, after arriving in India, Indiana Jones is asked by desperate villagers to find a majestic stone and rescue their children from a cult practicing child slavery, black magic, and ritual human sacrifice in honor of the goddess Kaya. This was truly dark. This was one of the darkest films I've seen, around this time. And I think it started a tradition. If you ever go back and look at film franchises, the second film is normally the darkest. Well, actually, you can go back to Empire Strikes Back, which is George Lucas again. But normally the second film in a franchise is the darkest. I'll give you some examples. Like I already said, Empire Strikes Back, Temple of Doom. I just had it in my head and I lost it. Lethal Weapon 2. That was a dark film. You might can argue all of the Lethal Weapon films were dark, but the second one was really dark, and so on and so on. It was just a tradition, I guess. And this was super dark. And at the time, granted, I was young, I didn't know this was a prequel. I honest to God did not know this was the prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. I always assumed, and it was like multiple viewings before I found out that this was the prequel. But I found it interesting that we're keeping on with this James Bond trope. You notice how James Bond has a different Bond girl every movie, and they were trying to do that with this franchise as well. This go around, Indy's love interest is Willie Scott, who is portrayed by Kate Capshaw. And ironically, Kate Capshaw turned right around and married the director, Steven Spielberg. They still married to this day. And so Steven Spielberg, who made this film out of heartbreak, found the love of his life. Look how things look how that turns out. But yeah, we get a new love interest for Indy. This film opens with a dance musical number, and this was also to please Steven Spielberg, who always dreamed of making a musical, which he turned out to make a few years ago with the remake of West Side Story, which was really good. Um, the club that they're in, that this shootout happens with these gangsters. The name of the club is Club Obi-Wan, and it was named after, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars. And it was a nice little Easter egg nog, and this was before Easter eggs were a thing. But it was good to see them put him in there. Now there was also an Easter egg in Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark when they're in that temple, and this is where Indy and Marion Ravenwood encounter those snakes and stuff. You get trapped in there with the snakes. On one of the walls in the hieroglyphics, one of the symbols is R2D2, and why am I blanking on the other name? Well, C-3PO. Lord have mercy. I was blanking so bad right there. But anyway, um, going back to the character of Willie Scott, over 120 actresses auditioned for that role. one of them was Sharon Stone. Yes, Miss Basic Instinct herself. She was one of the actresses who auditioned for the role of Willie Scott, which is funny because she co-starred in I guess you could say, Indiana Jones ripoff, Alan Quatermain, and she was the female lead in that movie. It I always thought that was funny. Like she couldn't get that one, but she got that. she she got the lower tier version of Indiana Jones. But ultimately, Kate Capshaw won the role, and I can see why. Not because she was sleeping with the director, but because she was really good in this role. I enjoyed her character, and that was one of the things going forward in this franchise that I was kind of upset about because I wanted more Willie. I loved her character. She was hilarious in this movie, hilarious, and I loved the back and forth with her and Harrison Ford. The chemistry was spot on perfect. But speaking of chemistry, the chemistry between Harrison Ford and Kiwi Kwan as Short Round was just beautiful. And at the time, Kiwi Kwan was 11 years old, and I love that dynamic for him. Indy has a sidekick now, and uh, it makes you wonder, like, what happened to him. If this was the prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, why wasn't he around in Raiders of the Lost Ark? But whatever. Uh, we're gonna we just gonna look past that. But anyways, I love the chemistry between those two. And in recent um events that you've seen, like award shows, and even at the Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny world premiere, you see Kiwi Kwan was there, and he surprised Harrison Ford, and they hugged. It was beautiful, man, to see after what 30, 40 years for them to get back together. Not in front of the camera, but it's good to see them together still, and really have a love for one another. I mean, Harrison Ford just lights up every time he sees him. It's like he's like the proud father when he sees Kiwi Kwan. Especially now with him being so successful after winning the Academy Award last year, and his career. was rock bottom, and for him not to give up and uh, uh, continue to fight, and got back in it and end up winning the biggest prize there is. And I think that is amazing. But it all started with Temple of Doom in his first role. Uh, really, really good chemistry with the actors. The story, as I said, was dark. You you got this cult that's living under this castle in India. They're enslaving these children, and they got human rituals, sacrifice and stuff, and the main villain is ripping out people's hearts out their chest while it's still beating. You know, just like what is going on, bro? We went, bruh. Just, it was dark, dark. But I will say this: at the time, and for many years, even after the Last Crusade, I always considered Temple of Doom my favorite. I always considered this the best out of them. You know, when I was younger. As I got older, my opinion changed. But when I was growing up, this was my favorite of the franchise, and I thought the dark turn was a change of pace for the character. Indy was more brutal, I guess you could say. He was more brutal in this movie, and uh, I guess because the character was in a different time of his life, and so this wasn't really Indy using his smarts as he did in the previous film. This was just him using blunt force trauma to get the point across. But I really enjoyed this film for what it was. Like I said, looking back at it now, it went from number one to probably number two. You know, well, definitely number two. Actually number three. But that's not saying it's horrible, especially in this franchise, which is full of great films, with the exception of one. But I really, really enjoyed it. The scene that I've mentioned before that was originally planned for uh, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that mine shaft cart escape chase thing, that was so exciting. It is so exciting when they jumped one because the tracks were out, and they managed to jump it and land on the other tracks on the other side. I still like jump out of my chair when I see that. It is so fun to watch, and I just love watching. It's very entertaining, but very dark and very controversial at the time. Um, it- a lot of blowback after this film was released, because of the depiction of Indian culture. It caused controversy and brought it to the attention of India's censors, who eventually placed a ban on the film, and it did not open in theaters in India. The film was later released, but uh, when it came out on home video, but it did not get released in theaters in India. One of the examples was the scene when they were eating the monkey brains, and you know the the Indian food. They made it seem like they eat these chilled monkey brains, and uh, eyeball soup, and beetles, and uh, baby snakes, and all. It was ridiculous. It was very ridiculous, and for a long time, I really did think that's what they ate in India, because it was like, man, why are they eating this? But it really caused a lot of brouhaha, rightfully so. But that wasn't the only controversy. In response to some of the violent sequences in this movie, and getting similar complaints from another Steven Spielberg produced film, Gremlins, Steven Spielberg suggested that the Motion Picture Alliance of America, the MPAA, uh, alter the rating system and introduce kind of a middle ground. Because at that time, and up until 1984, there was G, PG and R. There wasn't no, there wasn't no middle ground there. And NC-17. But uh we didn't have that problem with the NC-17 thing. But this movie was rated PG. So, well, it was going to be rated PG, but the MPAA was really leaning towards R because of all of the violent depictions in the film. And so Steven Spielberg suggested a new rated system and or a new category. And this was the film, first film to be rated PG-13, changing the film industry forever. But with all that being said, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is still a real good film. It's still one of my favorites. I really do enjoy it. It's very funny. The scene when the scene when Indiana Jones and Short Round are trapped in this room that's gonna crush them with the spikes, and Willie has to open up the door from the other side with a lever, had to stick her hand in the hole, and it has all the insects. I promise to the Lord, I still, if you can tell, I still crack up every time I watch that scene. I love the way that scene played out, and the acting between everybody in that scene with Harrison Ford, Kiwi Kwan, and Kate Capshaw, I thought was so perfect. I honestly, it's been 40 years and I'm still laughing. It is perfectly written, perfectly directed, and exceptionally acted by them. I love that scene. I will watch that movie just for that scene. I loved it. But the whole movie as a whole, uh, really great. Um, my knocks on Temple of Doom. Um, I, the ending was kind of muddy. Uh, I did the whole Indiana Jones being turned into kind of a mindless drone, being possessed by this cult. That portion of it, I didn't like it then. And I don't like it now. It still was like, why? I just didn't like it. But it didn't kill the movie for me, but I still enjoy it. But the end, as exciting as it is, with the fight on the little rope bridge, um, over the little crocodile pit, it was fine. Um, Still a little unbelievable when you had the coat on one side firing arrows at Indiana Jones, and they hit every single thing surrounding Indiana Jones except Indiana Jones. And I still cringe when I watch that. But it is what it is. You have to suspend disbelief. Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom gets a letter grade of an A minus. I still enjoy it. It's still one of the best in the franchise, and for the most part, it still holds up. Temple of Doom was produced for $28 million, and it went on to gross $333 million worldwide. A little dip from its predecessor, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I think the rating did that. Changing the rating and then the controversy surrounding it. But that still ain't nothing to sneeze at. That's still a lot of money for 1984. And the film still managed to get two Academy Award nominations for 1984, winning one for Best Visual Effects and being nominated for Best Original Score by John Williams, who once again did not win, which is a shock. I don't understand how he has not won for that iconic score. But moving on to the third film. And for the third film in this franchise, Steven Spielberg revisited the Monkey King Haunted Castle concept idea. Uh, before um, George Lucas and this go around was the voice of reason, and he suggested the Holy Grail, which once again we're gonna go to Sunday school. The Holy Grail is the cup that Jesus drunk from at the Last Supper. And so Spielberg wasn't 100% on board with it, but then he kind of came up with the idea of the father and son story and decided that the grail that everybody seeks could be a metaphor for a son seeking reconciliation with a father and a father seeking reconciliation with a son. And that became the 1989 film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This once again is an action adventure film directed by Steven Spielberg, and it's the third film Indiana Jones film franchise and a sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Um, Harrison Ford returns as the title character Indiana Jones, while his father is portrayed by Sean Connery. Other cast members featured River Phoenix as a young Indiana Jones. Uh, this go around, this film is set in 1938. Indiana Jones searches for his father, a Holy Grail scholar who has been kidnapped and held hostage by the Nazis while on a journey to find the Holy Grail. After all the criticism of, from Temple of Doom, Steven Spielberg chose to make a more lighthearted film for this installment, as well as bringing back several elements from Raiders of the Lost Ark. During the 5 years between Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade, he and executive producer George Lucas reviewed several scripts before accepting a script from Jonathan Bloom. Filming locations included Spain, Italy, West Germany, Jordan, United Kingdom, and of course the United States. I absolutely loved how this film opened. We go all the way back to 1912, and we get a young Indiana Jones, a teenage Indiana Jones, who was played by the late great River Phoenix, who is the brother of Joaquin Phoenix, in case you didn't know. And he was so awesome as Indiana Jones, and he did the work. He did the work because when you watched him on screen, he embodied Harrison Ford. You can see him as a young Harrison Ford, and he did an excellent job displaying that on the screen and seeing where Harrison Ford gets this, well, Indiana Jones get this sense of adventure from, and how much of a reckless individual he was, even as a young teenager. And you understand that he just never grew up. He's the same. And it was exciting to see him go on this little chase from these band of robbers or whatever that had taken a crucifix from this, I guess you say, cave or wherever that Indiana Jones and his Boy Scout troop had stumbled upon in, I want to say, Utah. And he takes the crucifix from them because he feels it belongs in a museum, still keeping the old indie tropes, and the robbers chasing him down. We see that in this time of his life, Indiana Jones is not afraid of snakes yet, but we find the origin of his fear of snakes. Initially, when he was spying on these robbers and seeing what they were doing, a snake had crawled over one of his friends, and the friend started freaking out, and Indy just picked up the snake. It was like, it's just a snake. It was like, like he looked at him with such disgust. Like, it's just a snake, So later on, when he's running from these robbers and they're on the train, and he falls through the roof of this train into this I don't know, crate or whatever. It was full of snakes, and they're crawling all over him, and he just freaks out. He freaks out, and that's where his fear of snakes come from. And I thought that was beautiful to a deep cut for all who love this film franchise to go all the way back to Raiders of the Lost Ark and find out, oh, this is why he cannot stand snakes. But I absolutely loved this movie. This became my favorite as I got older. It jumped because it was my least favorite for a long time. I didn't connect with it when I first saw it in 1989. Um, it wasn't until years later, and especially now, because of the father-son element of it. And this is even before my father had passed away or nothing like that. So it's nothing sentimental why I got into it or why I connected with it. It just connected as I got older. And I loved the way that story played out. I loved the chemistry between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. And I also loved the little behind the scenes portion of it that I told you that Steven Spielberg's dream was to direct a James Bond film. And this was his quasi James Bond franchise. And who better to play his James Bond, or should I say his James Bond's father, than the James Bond, Sean Connery. And oh man, the humor, the performances, the father and son relationship, the action sequences. This was a return to form. This was a return to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but amped up with even more action, more stakes, bigger set pieces. The scale was just amazing in this film. Loved it. I love it. It is truly, as it stands right now, as I said, I haven't seen Dial of Destiny, but I doubt Dial of Destiny surpasses this. This was a beautifully made film. As much as I said that Raiders of the Lost Ark is perfect, Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade is perfecter. And it gets a letter grade of an A plus. I mean, it is an amazing film. My favorite film. It's to watch it now. I watched it recently, of course, for the review, and I tear up at points. You know, the relationship between the father and son relationship is played out so well here, and it works. Everything works. You know, I, chef's kiss. That's all I can say. It's really not much I can say other than this is a perfect film. Two perfect films in this franchise. That is unheard of. This go around, the budget was doubled from previous films. This film was made for $48 million, and it went on to gross franchise high at the time, $474.2 million worldwide. Just like the previous films, this film was also nominated for 3 Academy Awards. It won 1 for Best Sound Editing. And yes, John Williams was nominated once again for Best Original Score, but lost once again. It's still a head scratcher. But yes, Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade gets an A plus. Now, after the release of the Last Crusade, George Lucas, he was all for letting the series end with a trilogy because he couldn't come up with any good ideas or plot devices to drive the next installment, and he chose to instead produce a television show, and that was the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and it explored the character in the early years, drawing inspiration from the opening of The Last Crusade. Uh, Harrison Ford was in one episode of the series. Now, when it came to the young Indiana Jones Chronicles, I did not really connect with it. I remember the premiere. I think it was what, 90 something, 92, somewhere up in there. I, I just didn't connect with it because I wanted Harrison Ford. In that one episode, I do remember him popping up there, but I did try to watch a couple more after that because I thought maybe Harrison Ford was going to pop back up. It never happened. And so I did not connect with it. I didn't get on board with the young Indiana Jones Chronicles, but I have heard that it was good, and I have told myself that I want it, I want to go back and watch it. I just got to find it somewhere, wherever it is. But one day, I will go back and watch the young Indiana Jones Chronicles. But yeah, as of right now, I have not. I have not. But while working on the young Indiana Jones Chronicles, George Lucas did come up with an idea for a new installment as far as the film franchise is concerned. And he realized that there was a possibility that the film, uh, to have a film with an older Indiana Jones set in the 1950s. And the film could reflect on a science fiction 1950s B movie style, with aliens as the plot device. Lucas looked at it as, the 1930s Saturday matinee serials inspired the first three Indiana Jones films, and it also inspired Star Wars to a degree. And so George Lucas felt like B movies, like them, It Came from Outer Space, and The Thing from Another World, could give them a whole new film genre to play with and add a new texture to the story, giving him the idea to use extraterrestrials. Meanwhile, Steven Spielberg believed he was going to mature as a filmmaker after making the trilogy and felt that his role in any future installments would be relegated to that of a producer or something like that. But Harrison Ford disliked that idea. He he told George Lucas, "No way am I being in a Steven Spielberg movie like that." Steven Spielberg himself, who just depicted aliens in Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T., he resisted it. George Lucas, he felt that Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford didn't fully understand the franchise flexibility, I guess you could say. Instead of doing the exact same movie all the time, all they had to do was just test different genres and each installment, and it wouldn't stop being an adventure of the title character looking after some artifact, as long as it is a believable MacGuffin with a archaeologist or a historical background. He came up with a story which Jab Stewart turned into a screenplay in 1993, and Stewart had previously written The Fugitive, which starred Harrison Ford, which was a great film. Um, George Lucas wanted Indy to get married, which would allow Henry Jones Sr. to return, expressing concern over whether his son was happy with what he had accomplished. After he learned that Joseph Stalin was interested in psychic warfare, he decided to make Soviets the villains and the aliens would have the psychic powers. Uh, Following Stewart's next draft, um, George Lucas hired the Last Crusade writer, Jeffrey Blum, to write the next three versions, the last of which was completed in 1996. 3 months later, Independence Day was released. And that changed everything. And Steven Spielberg told George Lucas he would not make another alien invasion film. Uh, George Lucas decided to focus on the Star Wars prequels. Steven Spielberg went on to win Academy Awards with Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan, more mature films. And so it, it looked like at that point that the franchise was dead. It looked like that all was lost in the Indiana Jones business. But in the year 2000, Harrison Ford, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Catherine Kennedy, Frank Marshall, they all had a meeting. And it was at the Film Institute, American Film Institute, and they were having a tribute to Harrison Ford that year. And they decided that they wanted to enjoy the experience of making another Indiana Jones film. Steven Spielberg also felt that returning to the franchise would be a breath of fresh air after he has made up to that point some darker films, as I mentioned before, Saving Private Ryan and so on. George Lucas had convinced Steven Spielberg to use aliens in the plot by saying that they were not extraterrestrial but interdimensional. Uh, with this concept taking inspiration from the shoestring theory. And the shoestring theory is an attempt to explain all of the particles and fundamental forces of nature in one theory by modeling them as vibrations of tiny strings. That's the shoestring theory. Uh, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas discussed the central idea of the B movie involving aliens, and George Lucas suggested using the crystal skulls to ground the idea. George Lucas found these artifacts as fascinating as the Ark of the Covenant, and had intended to feature them in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles before the show was canceled. M. Night Shyamalan, yes, M. Night Shyamalan was hired to write the next installment in the Indiana Jones franchise, expected to start shooting in 2002. But M. Night Shyamalan felt it was overwhelming to write the sequel, because he loved Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was one of the films that inspired him. But he has said in interviews that it was difficult to get Harrison Ford, Steven Spielberg, and George Lucas to focus, which is kind of weird. It's kind of weird because those are three faces that are on Mount Rushmore in Hollywood, in this industry, and you're a little peon, and you saying you can't get them to focus, so you blaming them. It's just weird how it came off. It may be true, but it's just weird the way that came off. But he left the project. They went through so many different writers. It took forever. It felt like forever. And eventually, it finally came to be. Of course, that should have been a writing on the wall. They never could get a writer. But nonetheless, they did settle on a writer. They locked down the script. And in the year 2008, we got Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And it is an action adventure film directed yet again by Steven Spielberg, and it is written by David Koepp, and reprising his role yet again as Indiana Jones, we have Harrison Ford. 19 years after the release of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This film is set in 1958, and it pits Indiana Jones against Soviet KGB agents led by Kate Blanchett searching for a telepathic crystal skull located in Peru. Indiana Jones is aided by his former lover, Marion Ravenwood. Returning is Karen Allen and their son, Mutt Williams, Mutt, uh, portrayed in this film by Shia LaBeouf. Now, you want to talk about super, super excited? I was super, super excited for this movie. I This is the first time I guess you could say I was old enough to take myself to go see an Indiana Jones movie. Uh, and I was so excited, and I took my children, I took my girls with me to go see this, and that was a badge of honor to bring my kids to an Indiana Jones movie, and just to watch that trailer and hear that iconic theme music that, for some strange reason, was nominated 3 times and never won. I cannot express to you the level of excitement. I went back to being that little boy again when I saw Harrison Ford with the fedora and the whip. And yes, he's older, but you didn't care, you know? You didn't care until you watched the movie. I did not like this movie at all. There was nothing about this movie that I can sit back and say, well, they took a chance. They took a chance. It just didn't work, but they took a chance. But no, it this movie felt like a money grab. It was nothing about this movie that was appealing. I felt that this go around, uh, Indy, it was a betray of that character. He just did not work this go around. I, he was just mean and honorary. Now, granted, Indy wasn't a happy-go-lucky, cheery, smiles all the time character, but and I know that he was older, and I guess that's how it was played off. But even with that, he wasn't in. He did not feel like Indiana Jones. Honestly, it did not feel like Indiana Jones. Um, the story didn't work. Did not like the aliens element of it. Uh, I don't know why George Lucas was pushing that so hard, but for all those years, it was just a dumb idea because that's not in Indiana Jones is not science fiction. I understand he didn't want them fighting Nazis no more and all this here. Yeah, I get it. I get all that. But aliens? It was just so silly. And uh, Shia LaBeouf, God bless him, awesome actor. But around this time, he had Transformers. He was doing. He was the it thing in Hollywood. You put Shia LaBeouf in a movie, and it's gonna make close to $1 billion. But man, he mailed this in. He mailed this in. And to be honest with you, Harrison Ford mailed this in. You can honestly tell he didn't care. That he did not care. And when you watch the movie, I can tell why he didn't care. You read that script and you like, ah. And so, the one good thing I can say, and it's the one thing that I remember about this movie positively. Uh, and that was when I mentioned earlier when we were reviewing Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I brought up how the crate at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark was stored in this big facility, this warehouse. Well, the opening scene here in this movie is the Russians had kidnapped Indy and brought him to Area 51 or Hangar 51 in the movie, and to find the alien artifact that he was supposedly had helped do an autopsy on, the Roswell accident. And I don't know why, but he's an archaeologist. Why would they bring an archaeologist to do an autopsy on an alien? But whatever. And so they bring him to this hangar, and we see the crate from the Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's where the Lost Ark is. And just a little quick little Easter egg. When they would chase, doing a little chase through the warehouse, and that was the best part, because at least at that point I was like, ah. But other than that, The rest of the movie, it failed. It really did, and it really it hurt. This was the one time I left the theater. I was like seriously upset, man. Seriously, it was so disappointing. I mean, for a film, period. Not just because it's Indiana Jones. It just was not a good film. You got Shia LaBeouf swinging from trees with monkeys. Uh, it was, you know, the reveal of him being the son. It was even more disappointing because in the last film we had such a beautiful father and son relationship. You know, it was treacherous. You know, they were rekindling, but they got to it. It was just a beautiful story of the father and son, and we get this little thrown in. Oh, that's your son. That, huh? It's, and it was zero chemistry between Harrison Ford and Shia LaBeouf. It just did not work. The alien storyline didn't work. Kate Blanchett, who is one of the best actresses working today, she was doing God's work. She was doing the best she could with what she was given, and it still couldn't get this movie over the hump. This is one of the worst films I sat down a week watch in the theater. Honestly, this was a monstrosity. This was the worst film in the franchise by far, and I truly understand why we're getting another Indiana Jones film because we cannot leave off on that note. Hopefully, as long as because a friend of mine asked me about it and said, "Man, are you hyped up for it or whatever?" I was like, "Well, I'm not really hyped up. As long as it's better than the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I'm good. I'm happy. It just that's the bar. If you're better than that, I'll have zero complaints. But as far as Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is concerned, it gets a letter grade of a D. It is that bad. It is that disappointing to me. I mean, the CGI was bad. I mean, the CGI in uh, Raiders of the Lost Ark was better than the CGI in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That makes no sense to me. But it happened. Yeah, it gets a D. It gets the D. And the less said about Nuke in the Fridge, the better. It was just bad. It was a bad movie. Uh, but it still made its money because it got some of mine. The the budget of this film was basically the equivalent of all the previous three films put together. The budget was $185 million to make this movie. It went on to gross $790 million. So it wasn't a, it was a hit. It was a certified hit. It almost made $1 billion. Uh, and that was mainly because I think nostalgia. You know, a lot of people wanted to go back into that world. We love Indiana Jones. And I'm pretty sure to a man, at least 95% of the people who watched that movie did not like it. Like, if you're a true Indiana Jones fan, it's no way you like this movie. No way. But even with that, there's still hope. There's still Indiana Jones in the Dial of Destiny. And this go around, uh, the players have changed. You know, Paramount Pictures were in control of Indiana Jones, and Lucasfilms was in control of Indiana Jones. Well, Lucasfilm still is, but now Lucasfilm is owned by Disney. And so Disney now owns Indiana Jones, the Indiana Jones property, should I say. And after Disney took over Lucasfilms, there was a lot of talk of starting the Indiana Jones franchise back up, probably rebooting it, getting somebody else. One of the names thrown out there was Chris Pratt, and I thought Chris Pratt would have been a decent Indy, but as we found out in Solo, the Star Wars story, nobody can play these characters like Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford is so unique. And, and he is these characters, and I know that ain't proper English either, but whatever. And he is Indiana Jones, and so recasting made no sense. you know, now whenever that day come, hopefully it's 100 years from now. Now, when Harrison Ford passes away, uh, yeah, then you can think about recasting. But as long as Harrison Ford has air in his lungs, there should never, 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 never be a Indiana Jones not played by Harrison Ford. But as we jump into this new addition to the franchise, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, there's no Steven Spielberg, there's no George Lucas, but we do still have Harrison Ford. Taking over for Steven Spielberg is James Mangold, who wouldn't have been my number one choice. But when you sit back and think about James Mangold and the films that he's made, it makes sense. Especially when you look at Logan and you see how he gave Logan the proper send off. You know what I'm saying? It with such grace. I guess you can say uh I can see him sending off Indiana Jones with some grace. And uh, when the trailer was released, it felt like Indiana Jones. It felt like it was a worthy film to be in this franchise. He didn't try to make it his own. Now, granted, I haven't seen the film yet. Might see the film and think completely different. But as it stands right now, it looks like it fits right into the lore. And we'll see this Friday, June the 30th. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. But that is the show today. Went a little long. We have 4 films to review, people. I mean, come on. We went through this iconic character of Indiana Jones, played masterfully by the great Harrison Ford for well over 40 years. And this is his swan song this Friday with this last film in the franchise, his last go around as Indiana Jones. And he deserves all his flowers. I cannot wait to see this movie. I would like to know though. I would like to know, are you an Indiana Jones fan? Were you like me as a kid trying to swing from a branch with a whip? Well, you didn't have a whip. I had some rope that I was trying to swing like Indiana Jones, jumping from my dad's truck to statutes of limitation. Now I can't be convicted yet, to my mom's car and all this here. Just doing all these stupid stunts and almost killing myself. Were you like me? And are you excited for this new addition to the franchise, the last addition to this franchise? I'd like to know. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look me up on Twitter at KB Radio Network, and on other social media platforms. Just look up the KB Radio Network. Don't forget about YouTube. Just look up the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube. Subscribe to that channel and like this video if you don't mind. Speaking of giving likes and love, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever it is you're currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me on this look back at one of the greatest film franchises of all time, Indiana Jones. Can't wait to speak to you when I review Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. That should be coming up this weekend, so be on the lookout for that. Want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love one another, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.